All right, we are at the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Physical Records Management, a Thing of the Past. We appreciate you joining us today, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a moment and introduce today's speakers. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimel. I am joined by our key speaker today, Gimel Solution Architect, Tim Butler. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we will answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up in a separate window, so please keep an eye out for that. We ask for your participation. All answers will be anonymous to the rest of the crowd. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Now, to kick things off, I have just a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimel and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimel is an information governance software company that was founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that help you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimel can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimel's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. As you can see there on the screen, our comprehensive solutions include migration from legacy system, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, and document management for SAP content. With that, I will go ahead and hand the floor over to Tim so he can get started with today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Shana. I appreciate it. And as always, everyone, appreciate your giving us just a few minutes out of your busy day. Hope you'll find this to be informational and helpful and to the job that you have been assigned to do. Guys, it actually occurred to me as we were preparing the webinar, you know, we get a list ahead of time of who's registered. And I noticed quite a few of our existing customers attending this webinar. So thank you for attending. We're grateful for that. But then I wondered to myself, based upon the title of the webinar itself, is physical records management a thing of the past? I said, wow, I wonder if some of these folks are thinking, man, is Gimel about to deprecate their physical records management functionality product? And guys, not only is the answer no, it's a resounding heck no. So let me assuage any fears that may have cropped up by the title of the webinar there itself. And if that's why you joined, there's your answer. You are dismissed. You are free to go. I want to make sure you appreciate that. We're actually very excited here at Gimel about maintaining our existing product suite, including Gimel Physical. And not only that, but continuing to develop it on into the future. Some very exciting plans for that product itself. Now, as Shana mentioned up front, guys, we do have a couple poll questions, and I want to start off with one actually right here. And would really appreciate if you would spend just a minute to give us your feedback here. So just give us your best guess. We know you're kind of guesstimating here, but when do you think your organization will be physical records free? And as you're thinking that over, guys, physical records we're really talking about, right? These are the file folders that you might be managing, boxes. It could be older stuff like microfilm, microfiche, really anything that's non-digital that your organization would consider as a record. When do you think the day will be that there'll be a really low number or none of those whatsoever that need to be managed? All right, so let's pause for a moment here. And I am actually really glad to see that already is a 0%, because if you would answer that, you are probably in the wrong webinar. So glad to see that. Just taking a minute here to digest this. And guys, thank you for doing this. You know, by and large, this is really for our benefit, just to continue to gain some market intelligence. I am actually, I'll say, a little bit surprised. Almost half of you have answered never. That's a little higher than I would have thought, but encouraged to see that, right? So stealing my own thunder, guys, and you'll see this as we go through the rest of the webinar itself. To the answer itself, will physical records management be a thing of the past? The answer, guys, is really a resounding no. And that's what we're going to wind up saying here in just a minute.
And actually, Tim, there was a little comment in the chat saying that they include hybrid physical, such as CDs, DVDs, external hard drives, and etc. So
Yep.
that's something that you hadn't considered when polling.
Yep,
Some people
good.
do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that comment. And thank you, Shana. Absolutely. You are correct. Now, here's where we're going today, guys. Really going to just have a couple of slides here on each of these points, 1 through 4 at a glance. So I'm going to ask the question, why do we even have physical records? I mean, the answers are kind of obvious, but I think it's worth taking just a minute to talk about that, to put things in context, if you will. Secondly, I'm going to share with you an analogy. I hope the analogy, you find it to be helpful. I do. It also helps just to kind of set historically where physical records fit into the whole scheme of things and where they're heading moving into the future. We're then going to talk in a little bit of detail about the actual future of physical records management. And then finally, guys, at the end, kind of the takeaways, if you will, in light of hopefully what we discussed here today and what we learned. Great. What do we do, right? What are the actionable steps we should be considering or taking for the management of the physical records themselves, right? So let's move it forward. Point number 1, why do we even have physical records? Guys, the image you're seeing on your screen here is what some historians, some archaeologists, some scholars consider to actually be the oldest physical records we have. You can see the details there on the right. As with anything from ancient Egypt, there is quite a bit of debate about the accuracy of this, but nonetheless, what you're seeing here, these tiles, if you will, they're physical records, right? They are really old. They go back probably to that 4th millennia BC. They're roughly more than 5,000 years old. They go way back in time. And I actually thought to myself when I was researching this, I said, you know, the Pharaoh had these records created and he may have gone by a different name, but I can guarantee you there was someone under his authority whose job it was to manage records, right? So it may have gone by a different name, but just wanted to point out, guys, that for those of you that are records managers, which is hopefully most of you in the webinar here today, you are part of a long line of professionals. You're part of an illustrious career path that goes way back in time. Now, before we move on, guys, it's a little bit, you know, this, why do we even have physical records? Just to give you this one example, this really ancient one in front of you here. I mean, the answer is kind of obvious, right? Well, why do we have them? Because we produced billions of these things over time, right? It's a little bit like, for those of you old enough to appreciate this, it's a little bit like vinyl records, right? Music, LP. Why do we have those? Well, because we produced and bought and consumed so many of them and all of their follow-ons, right? After the vinyl LPs were the 8-tracks and the cassettes and the CDs and all of these things as precursors to music being streamed, right? So for the Gen Zs and maybe the millennials amongst us, you're like, wow, why do you even have this stuff? Well, guys, from baby boomers like me, it's because that's all we had. And we've had them for a very, very long time. Now, outside of just that obvious answer, why do we have them? Because we had so many. I do want to throw in here, guys, that just like with the vinyl records, so it's true of physical records from the corporate perspective. There are actually quite a few people at every level in an organization that prefer the physical records, right? We're talking anything from end users to records management personnel on up to the executive team. For a lot of folks, there really is a preference for that. Now, here's the big analogy I wanted to share with you, right? So just take a moment to focus on the graph in front of you. And in the lower left, you will see, I sometimes say this, guys, in various settings, but really, having been doing this for a couple decades now, I sometimes say physical records is the AM radio of records management. Now, What do I mean by that? Well, let's focus on the graph for a second. Guys, the whole technology of AM broadcasting invented, here's your quick little historical lesson for the day, invented around the turn of the previous century, around 1900. It wasn't actually brought to market till about 1922. It took some time for the finances to get aligned, the technology to be built properly, to roll it out to the masses. Now, it's difficult for us now, a century later, 100 years later, to really appreciate what a wow factor there was for AM radio, right? If you were to tell people back then in 1922, there's going to be some guy speaking into something called a microphone in a room, and that room is miles, even perhaps hundreds of miles away from you, and you almost instantaneously will be able to hear what he's saying, those folks would have just looked at you like you were from another planet. It was like sorcery to them, right? What are you talking about? Well, the wow factor was huge, right? And so when this got rolled out to the public, people loved it, right? Now, looking at the graph, the blue line there reflects the number of AM radio stations by year. Now, this is just within the US, whereas the orange line reflects the FM. Now, why did I put that in there? Fast forward from 1922, about 20 years, FM technology came along. Some scientists said, hey, AM is really cool. We've got a little better way of doing this, produces a higher fidelity, a better sound. It's called frequency modulation, or FM. Now, the thing was, when FM radio began to be introduced to the public, a lot of folks said, well, that's it for AM because FM's better, right? Why would we continue to use AM? A surprising thing happened, right? In spite of it being, quote, better, looking at the graph there, between 1940 and 1960 in particular, not only did AM continue to grow, both in terms of the number of stations as well as the number of listeners, it actually was widening the gap between AM and FM. FM was increasing, absolutely, but the gap was widening. It actually took about 20 years from the introduction of FM for it to change that tide. Now, backing up to 1950, TV was introduced, right? Same kind of story. When TV got introduced to the public, folks said, well, that's it for radio. Why would you want radio if you can now have audio plus video? But nevertheless, both AM and FM continued to grow. Fast forward a few decades, guys, eventually XM came on the scene, and then nowadays we've got the streaming, you've got your Spotify's and all that. Why do we still need AM radio? Well, do we need it? That's the debatable question. But the point is, notice the graph, guys, and this is where the analogy, I find it to be quite good. Physical records, right? They were the cat's meow for a long, long, long time, actually thousands of years. But now in present day, roughly speaking, around 1980 or so, we began to introduce the OCRing, the capture, the image scanning of documents, and people began to say, well, that's it for physical records. They're going to go away. We're going to digitize everything. And then fast forward a few more years, records began to be born digital. Well, why do we need physical records? Guys, we still have them. And in fact, I would be so bold as to say, difficult to find this number. I actually can't. If any of you can point me in the right direction, I'd love to see it. But I believe, just anecdotally, there are actually more physical records now than there ever has been. Now, it certainly is true, I'm sure, that the rate of growth has declined, just like it has with the AM graph here, but there's still a lot of these records around. One quick anecdote here, guys. I smiled at myself right after Shayna and the marketing team said, hey, Tim, can you do this webinar? We had a tropical storm blow through where I live. It knocked out our power, right? So I was without power. I was without internet. I said, no problem. I'm going to get on my phone. I'll use cell tower service. I'll be able to get the information I need. Well, I live sort of in the country, and apparently where I live, at the cell tower that services my neighborhood was overwhelmed. I could not get any information. All I was left with is I could text. So I wound up texting some friends saying, hey, can you look this up and find out when my power is going to come back on? And I turned to my wife and I said, you know what, sweetheart, do we have an AM radio? And she looked at me and she shook her head and she said, no, I don't think we do. And I was like, dang, I wish I had that old AM radio. Guys, there's a lot of parallels there with people wanting, enjoying, and sometimes needing the physical record itself. All right, so to the central question, right, or one of the central questions. All right, Tim, so thanks for the historical lesson there. But surely, right, this is now 2021, we're moving forward, 2021, we're moving forward. Why let's talk about day forward. Why do we need these physical records? Surely they're going to go away and go away soon. And the answer, honestly, is yes. Like AM radio, I'm sure the day is going to come while they will be gone. But guys, I'll just tell you, from my perspective, it is highly unlikely that that is going to happen during our careers and even in our lifetimes. Maybe for our kids or maybe for our grandkids, but they are going to be with us for quite some time. Now, kind of having just made that assertion, let me introduce some data points, guys, some real facts and figures here. As I was preparing for this webinar, I thought to myself, well, let's just dig a little deeper and get some real facts to back up my assertion that physical records will be here for a while. And so what I did, 3 different categories here that we'll quickly cover, guys, for the future, and why we at Gimel don't think they're going to go away anytime soon. At the top, some real life data points by the numbers. So you can read them, guys, but let me just add a little bit of color. We currently have amongst all of our clients, we have a Gimel client in the pharmaceutical sector. They are, guys, they are creating, these are brand new physical records, 60,000 file folders per year. 60,000, that's a lot. Even by today's standards, 60,000 new ones per year. Working down the page there. Another current Gimel client in the public sector. They've been around for a while. They manage a big warehouse. In that warehouse, guys, they have 250,000 microfiche that they manage. 250,000. That's a lot of those little thin pieces of film, right? In addition to that, not quite as antique as microfiche, but boxes, right? They've got carton boxes of records, 500,000 boxes. It takes a while to get rid of all those boxes, right? They're going to be managing those boxes for as far as we can see. And then the last one there, recently, Gimel was interacting with a particular prospect within the financial services industry. And they asked this question. They said, hey, Tim, can the software, can it manage approximately 40 million box data records? By the way, the answer is yes. The software can do that Gimel provides, but that's a lot, guys. Now, I think in reality, some of those 40 million actually reflected deleted boxes, but nonetheless, from their perspective, they were envisioning managing up to 40 million boxes. There's a lot of physical records out there by the numbers. Second category, real life data points in terms of time. Guys, now, again, a real Gimel client here, a county client here on the East Coast. You wouldn't find this, generally speaking, as you moved west, just because we don't have the data going back out west. We haven't been there that long, but here on the East Coast we have. So we've got a current Gimel client with records dating back to the 1600s. That's 400, going on 400 years, guys. Some of these records are old. They've been there for a while, and they're going to be there for a while. These are permanent records. They will continue to manage as long as possible. I took another client, guys, that second bullet point under real life data points. And I was curious. I didn't know the answer to this. I said, I'm going to evaluate their data. Big client, hundreds of thousands of boxes they are managing. So I took their data, I did some massaging, ran some queries, and I wanted to find out, all right, let's think forward now, Tim. When will they be deleting these boxes? You can see there that the average scheduled destruction date for this client, for those boxes, and it was roughly about 500,000 or 600,000 boxes they manage, is somewhere within calendar year 2024. So not that far out, right? It's only about 3 years from now. I was actually a little surprised by that. I said, that's sooner than I would have expected. Now, it is the average. There are some certainly before that. There's some that are after that, but the average was 3 years from now. But then when I dug a little bit deeper, guys, I realized that a lot of their records had no scheduled destruction date. And the reason they didn't, and it was to the tune of 1 out of 6, the reason they didn't is because those boxes had been classified under retention series that designated them as permanent records. So in round numbers, this client's got about 100,000 boxes that have been designated as permanent. Obviously, permanent means a long time. They're going to be there for a while. And then finally, guys, just some sort of miscellaneous stuff at the bottom I wanted to call out. There's this perceived legal risk of electronic signatures, right? It's actually been on the books for a couple of decades now, at least in the Western culture, where electronic signatures are considered legally to carry just as much weight as physical wet ink signatures. In spite of that being on the books, there's a number of industries that are really reticent. They're really slow to adopt this, and they're just more comfortable using wet ink signatures. And what do those signatures go on? They go on hard copy paper. They are physical records. They're going to be around for a while. Guys, a lot of folks have said over the years, you know what? Let's digitize everything. The physical records, even the ones that are, quote, permanent, let's just OCR those guys. Let's get them digital. And in a perfect, ideal world, that's probably an awesome idea, but we don't live in that kind of a world, right? And so from a cost benefit perspective, it just doesn't make sense to digitize everything. You're going to keep the physical records. It's just cheaper to do so. As I mentioned up front, guys, sort of anecdotally here, there's just a lot of folks that still want the physical record. And I'm really not just talking about the baby boomers, right? I'm talking about across all the culture, there's some folks that prefer those records. And so therefore, there's a good chance you're going to wind up keeping them. Guys, our webinar here today is mostly focused, I appreciate, here on the Western world. But there is a lot of the developing world, guys, that they're behind us technologically, and they still do heavily rely upon physical records. Therefore, they're going to be managed as well. Now, in light of that, guys, that physical records are going to be around for quite some time into the future, you as records management, I wanted to leave you with some takeaways. All right, Tim, thanks for the history. We appreciate it. Thanks for just sort of the summary of where things stand in the market. What are some takeaways? What are some things I think that I encourage you to do, guys, to be considering as you consider how to manage the physical records within your organization? Number one, guys, and these all boil down to the tools that you adopt to manage the physical records, make sure they excel in these 6 areas. Number one, in terms of data searching, right? Make sure you've got a tool at your disposal, guys, that allows for the entry of all kinds of metadata, right? There are some offsite vendors that provide these things, but they're really limited in what you can put in. Look for a tool that allows you to put in whatever you want to put in, regardless of data type, large text fields, list fields, you name it. Look for a tool that's very robust in terms of the architecture for housing the type of data that you can then easily and intuitively search, right? If you can't find the data about your physical records, what an incredible waste of time. You got to just go through and pull all those physical records to find what you're looking for. Number two, and related to number one there, right? In the end, data searching is just kind of a fun activity, right? Because usually, and generally speaking, especially with physical records, there's so much data that comes back. You need some way to be able to make that raw data useful. And in the end, guys, that boils down to data analysis and data reporting, right? Make sure the tool that you have, the tools that you'll consider to get in the future, they have great functionality surrounding ways to filter that data, to group that data, to aggregate that data so you can produce meaningful reports. Raw data and the ability to search all by itself has its place, but it's limited. You need some way to capture that in meaningful chunks. The third one there, guys, let me apologize. I kind of mislabeled this a little bit. It really should say data/record retrieval. But right, specific to physical records, just doing the searching and the analysis, no matter how good your metadata model is, you can't always get what you need. Unlike with electronic records, where you can get all the information you need right from the screen, that is not always the case with physical records, right? Often you need to get that box or that file or that piece of microfiche or that roll of microfilm in your hands. So make sure that the tool that you adopt has really robust functionality surrounding that whole requesting process. It's really a workflow tool, a workflow aid to manage appropriately and via a permanent audit trail everywhere those records are going, who's requesting them, and when they need them. The last 3 on here, guys, very quickly, all related in one way or another to end of life of records, right, guys? I think obviously, yes, as you're able to disposition, destroy these physical records, but make sure you do it in the right way. There are legal ramifications for not doing it the right way. This all comes down to, first of all, data classification. The tools that you adopt, make sure that software has a really nice classification or records retention module, right? That you can take these physical records per their metadata and assign them into the proper rules that specify the length of time until you can destroy them. Related to that, number 5, there's always exceptions to the rule, right? There's going to be holds that come along, either for legal reasons or audit reasons or what have you. Make sure you've got that ability, of course, to put records temporarily on hold. And then finally, guys, Again, unlike electronic records, where really with the push of a button, you can delete that data and that record, not so with physical records, right? There's a whole logistical process that must be followed to make sure you find the right physical records, you aggregate them, you double check you've pulled the right ones before you actually call that shredding truck to come by and actually destroy those records. So in summary, guys, make sure you've got or are looking for tools that support these 6 features that we just mentioned here. So very quickly, guys, and in summary, why do we even have records? As I used to tell my kids when they were young, because that's why we have them. We have all kinds of records. They just are. They've been with us a long time. They're going to be with us a lot longer. You heard the analogy to AM radio. I hope you found that to be helpful. We talked about the future of physical records management. And then finally, guys, we wrapped it up here with some present considerations, things that I encourage you to really focus on to make sure the tools at your disposal are up to snuff when it comes to managing the physical records. Guys, I appreciate your time today. I hope it was helpful. We do have one more poll question here for you, and I'm going to turn things back over now to Shayna.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And it's always a pleasure when we get to host you, Tim. It's always an entertaining webinar. So Tim talked a little bit about our solutions in the beginning, especially our physical records management solution. If you like more information on any of the solutions I mentioned or he mentioned, please go ahead and answer the poll you should see pop up on your screen. You'll actually probably talk to Tim again if you say yes, if you want more information. Okay, so there are a couple of questions in the Q&A portion, Tim, that I'm just going to go ahead and get started on so we can utilize our time efficiently. But before I do, there are some really great comments. We always like to make sure that we are communicating back and forth instead of presentation style. So I'm just going to read some of these comments from your peers to know what they have to say about some of this content. So in terms of the hieroglyphics, this was just amusing, just considering records managers, physical records managers as one of the oldest professions is something interesting. But somebody also said, I've found that particularly for sensitive or legally binding documents, the physical records are much less fragile. So while we may digitize the records, the digitized versions usually act as the backups for the physical data.
Great point. Yeah, great point.
There's another, it looks like a comment, permanent retention trigger may also include indefinite because the trigger is unknown in the future. For example, for pharma, 10 years after the product has disappeared from the last market, but permanent is by definition different, more historical. Yeah. So some great comments there. Appreciate that, guys. To move on to the Q&A. Are you aware of a core physical records management tool requirements list, perhaps an industry standard?
Wow, that's a great question. The quick answer is no, I am not aware of that. We would certainly be glad to supply one to you, one that we use internally here at Gimel. But if there is sort of an industry standard out there, I am not aware of it. Great question, though.
Yeah, I know in one of the last webinars you did, Tim, you actually had a list of things to consider when looking at a physical records management tool that we would be happy to provide. Yeah. Another question we have is, what industries have you seen more move towards electronic records management in terms of those that you've seen stay put with physical records management?
Yeah, good question, guys. And there's so much variation there, but just kind of generalizing here within the healthcare industry, there's been certainly a significant movement towards the electronic health record. So healthcare medical clients tend to move in that direction. Surprisingly, I think, at least from my perspective, the federal government is trying very hard, the whole M1921 initiative to get everything electronic. On the other side of the spectrum, the industries where I've seen them to be a little slower to adopt purely electronic records would include the pharmaceutical industry. It would include financial services. It would include the legal sector. But these are generalizations, guys. There's lots of variation within each sector.
Someone also commented in that nuclear. I don't know if you have much experience with nuclear clients, but yeah. And then the last question, I encourage you guys to put questions in the Q&A, but the last one, unless we have another one sneak through, is do you see a lot of people looking for records management solutions with either electronic or physical initiatives, or more of a hybrid approach together?
Yeah, awesome question, guys. So again, wouldn't it be wonderful, right? If there was a tool in the market that let you manage both electronic and physical records, sort of from a top shelf, best of breed perspective that does both of them. Guys, to best of my knowledge, there's no tool out there that does that, although there's obviously all kinds of similarities between physical and electronic records. There are significant differences, logistical and workflow in nature, that often require either two solutions or a vendor who can supply you sort of a hybrid solution, as was referenced here. But I want to emphasize it's usually not just a single solution if you want the best management functionality for both types of records.
Great. Well, that concludes the Q&A. If you can think of any more questions, both of our email addresses have been up on the screen for a while, or if those are a little bit hard to remember, you can always comment or always email us at info@giml.com. Visit our website, www.giml.com. Tim, we're seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat for your participation today, so really well appreciated. If you would like a recording of this webinar, to view a recording of the presentation, we will be sending that out between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. It's also going to be available on our website, so keep an eye out for that email if you want to see the recording of this. We hope to see you on our next webinar next week, building a case for your digital transformation to Microsoft 365. But with that, thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We hope you have a great rest of your day.